Okay, let's dive in. You've handed us this stack of recent news reports, analysis, summaries. It's quite a snapshot of the world right now.
It really is.
Our mission, like always, is to cut through the noise, pull out the most important stuff from this material you've shared, and help you get quickly informed on what's happening.
Yeah, try and make sense of it all.
Exactly. And your sources, they cover a lot. International conflicts, U.S. politics, business, environment, weather.
It's a wide range, definitely. Shows how much is going on at once.
It does. So let's try and unpack this stack together.
Sounds good. Our goal is really just to bring forward the core understanding from these specific sources you've given us.
Perfect. Let's start with international affairs. Your sources lead off with something pretty significant. Ukrainian drone strikes near Moscow, reported May 29th. What did the material show?
Right. So according to these reports, Ukraine launched a series of drone attacks. They were targeting Russian military and industrial sites located in areas near
Yeah, to
Moscow.
Moscow itself.
That's what the sources say. Russian officials reported intercepting, destroying many of them.
Yeah.
But the material also notes that some drones did manage to hit targets,
Yeah.
resulting in some infrastructure damage.
Okay, that sounds like a notable escalation. What kind of context do the sources provide?
Well, the analysis in your material points out that drones are becoming this really cost-effective tool in modern conflicts.
For surveillance, strikes.
Exactly. And Ukraine, using them this deep inside Russia, that seems to signify a strategic shift.
How so? What's the thinking?
The analysis suggests it's kind of twofold. One, disrupt Russian operations, maybe supply chains, but also, importantly, it's about demonstrating Ukraine's growing tech capability.
Showing they can reach further now.
Precisely. Further than maybe previously thought.
Who are the key players we need to understand here, based on your sources?
Well, operationally, it's the Ukrainian armed forces carrying out the strikes.
And the target is Russian military and defense infrastructure.
Right. But the context in your material also brings in the international community, NATO, neighboring countries. They're all watching this very closely.
Understandably. What about potential impacts? What do the reports mention?
The immediate ones, based on the sources, are, well, obviously heightened tensions.
Yeah.
And the potential for Russian retaliation. Internally, for Russia, it also raises questions about their airspace security, the effectiveness of their defenses.
And for the international community.
More pressure could require some kind of response, maybe mediation efforts.
Your sources also lay out different viewpoints on these strikes. How are those framed? Remember, we're just reporting neutrally what's in the material.
Absolutely. So the Ukrainian perspective, as presented, sees these actions as necessary, defending sovereignty, weakening Russia's ability to wage war.
Makes sense from their side.
The Russian perspective views it as an act of aggression, something that justifies countermeasures. And the global outlook. Your sources describe it as mixed. Some support Ukraine's right to self-defense. Others are calling more for de-escalation, diplomacy, trying to prevent things widening.
Okay, moving from that difficult situation to another one your sources highlight, also from May 29th. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza escalating. What were the key events there?
Yeah, this is really concerning. The reports you provided detail intensified Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip. Tragically, they resulted in at least 44 Palestinian deaths on that specific day.
44.
And then, underscoring the sheer desperation, there was this separate incident. Civilians stormed a United Nations aid warehouse in Deir al-Balah.
Stormed a UN warehouse. Why?
Out of need, it seems. The reports suggest extreme desperation for supplies, and tragically, multiple fatalities occurred there too.
Wow. That UN incident really paints a picture of the conditions.
Yeah.
What's the broader context?
The sources frame this within the long-standing conflict, obviously, a flashpoint. Recent escalations include not just the military actions, but also blockades, severely limiting access to essentials: food, water, medicine.
So the warehouse storming is a symptom of that lack of access.
A stark symptom, yes. People driven to desperate measures for basic survival.
Who are the main parties involved here, as described in the material?
The reports identify Israel, conducting the airstrikes, Palestinian civilians, caught in the middle, facing the violence and the shortages,
And the UN?
and the United Nations, trying to provide aid, but facing immense challenges. Security issues, facilities sometimes hit, and just being overwhelmed by the scale of the need.
What are the wider impacts the sources point to?
Beyond the immediate tragic rise in deaths, it's a significant worsening of the humanitarian crisis overall.
Okay.
Aid organizations face huge security risks delivering help. The reports suggest this could lead to more displacement, long-term socioeconomic damage. Just devastating.
And the different perspectives presented in your material, again, reporting neutrally.
Right. The Israeli government's stated position is that the airstrikes are necessary for national security.
Okay.
Palestinian authorities condemn the attacks. They view them as disproportionate, causing unacceptable harm to civilians.
And the international view.
Broadly, the international community is calling for immediate ceasefires, more humanitarian access. Some countries specifically criticize the scale of the military actions, the civilian impact.
Okay, let's shift slightly. Still in the realm of incidents, your sources cover a South Korean Navy patrol plane crash. What happened there?
Yes, on May 29, 2025, a South Korean Navy P-3C patrol aircraft crashed near Pohang. This was during a training mission.
A training mission? That's tragic.
Very. 3 of the 4 crew members died. The search was still ongoing for the missing person when these reports came out. The crash also caused a fire worryingly close to a residential area, though thankfully it didn't spread too badly.
What's the significance of this particular aircraft, the P-3C?
It's been a real workhorse for their Navy's maritime patrol since 1995.
Long time.
Yeah. So while accidents are always possible, your sources note, this is seen as a rare but serious incident for this aircraft type. It immediately raises concerns about maintenance, operational safety protocols.
Who's primarily involved in the aftermath?
The South Korean Navy, of course, dealing with the loss and the investigation, emergency services who responded, and the local residents near Pohang who were obviously concerned.
And the impacts, beyond the terrible loss of life.
Well, likely a temporary suspension of similar training flights, pending investigation. A thorough review of safety protocols seems certain, and, potentially increased public concern about military flights near populated zones.
Right. Okay, let's pivot now. From international incidents to U.S. politics, your sources cover some notable legal and personnel developments. First, this federal court ruling blocking some of former President Trump's tariffs. That sounds like a big deal.
It is, yeah.
No.
A significant legal challenge to presidential power on trade. On May 29th, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled that former President Trump exceeded his authority.
Yeah.
Specifically, with the sweeping tariffs he imposed, including on many Chinese goods, under something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA.
IEPA.
The court found that using IEPA for these broad tariffs wasn't justified by a national emergency in the way the law requires.
So the court is basically saying that specific power, IEPA, was misused.
That's the essence of it, as described in your sources. IEEPA is typically for, targeted sanctions, real national security emergencies. Using it for broad economic tariffs to fix trade imbalances, the court said, overstepped the executive branch.
And the decision stops those tariffs.
Pending appeal, yes. It halts implementation of the tariffs the court deemed unlawful.
What's the background here? Where did these tariffs originate?
Your sources explain they were part of the Trump administration's Liberation Day initiative, aimed at tackling trade imbalances, protecting domestic industry, often framed in national security terms.
But critics felt using IEEPA was wrong.
Yes. They argued it was an unprecedented stretch of executive authority. The court's decision, as legal experts noted in the material, kind of reinforces the constitutional idea that Congress, not the president, has the main say over trade rules.
Who are the key players in this legal fight?
Well, you have former President Trump, whose administration implemented the tariffs. Then the plaintiffs, your sources identify them as small businesses, state governments, groups negatively impacted.
Okay.
And then the court itself, the U.S. Court of International Trade, making the ruling.
What are the potential impacts of this decision?
Potentially pretty far-reaching. If it stands, it could mean rolling back certain tariffs, which would definitely shift international trade dynamics.
And legally?
It sets a precedent. Could limit how future presidents try to use IEPA for trade matters. Interestingly, your sources point out financial markets reacted positively, seemed to anticipate better trade relations.
And the different perspectives on the ruling itself. Neutral reporting here.
Right. The Trump administration criticized it heavily, called it judicial overreach, plans to appeal. Legal experts quoted in the material, they generally see it as affirming checks and balances, Congress's role.
And businesses.
The business community, especially those hit by the tariffs, largely supportive. Relief from uncertainty, potentially.
Also in U.S. politics, your sources mention Elon Musk resigning from a government role. What was that about?
Yes. Elon Musk announced on May 28th he was stepping down as head of the U.S. Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they called it.
The Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Okay. Sounds like something he'd be involved in. What was the goal?
Your sources indicate he was appointed by the Trump administration precisely for that reason, to bring a private sector, Silicon Valley approach to streamlining government.
Trying to cut red tape.
Exactly. Apply innovation, efficiency principles from his companies to federal agencies. But according to the reports, his tenure faced pretty significant resistance. Bureaucratic hurdles, legal challenges, disagreements over policy direction.
Sounds like a tough gig. Who are the main parties involved?
Well, Musk himself, the Trump administration that appointed him, and then the federal agencies that were supposed to be reformed, many apparently resistant to the proposed changes.
What's the impact of his resignation?
It could definitely slow down, maybe even reverse some of the reforms he started.
Right.
It also raises questions about DOG's future, and maybe more broadly, about how feasible it is to just plug private sector methods into complex government systems. The sources also suggest it might affect public perception, both of Musk and the administration's reform agenda.
And the different takes on his time there and leaving.
Neutral summary from your sources. Supporters praised his ambition, his innovative thinking.
Good.
They felt he wasn't given a fair shot or enough cooperation.
Okay.
Critics, though, argued his approach was too disruptive. Maybe he didn't fully grasp public sector complexities, regulations.
And neutral observers.
They tend to highlight it as a case study, showing the inherent tension between pushing for innovation and maintaining institutional stability in government. It's a tricky balance.
All right, let's shift over to business and the economy. Your sources have some interesting reports on tech giants. Nvidia, for instance, record revenue despite some major challenges. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's quite the story. Really shows our market position, but also the impact of geopolitics. On May 29th, Nvidia announced Q1 results for their fiscal year 2026. Record revenue, $44.1 billion.
$44 billion, that's huge. What was the growth like?
Massive. Up 69% compared to the same quarter last year.
Wow. 69% year-over-year growth at that scale is staggering. Where did most of that come from?
The reports are very clear. The vast majority was their data center segment. That brought in $39.1 billion,
Okay.
which itself was up 73% year over year. This is all about the AI boom, right? The global demand for the hardware needed to train and run these complex AI models. Nvidia is just central to that right now.
But you said challenges. What were they facing?
Right. This is where it gets really interesting. Your sources emphasized this record growth happened despite significant headwinds, specifically U.S. export restrictions.
Ah, the restrictions on selling high-end chips to China.
Exactly. Things like their H20 AI chip. These restrictions actually cost the money directly, a $4.5 billion charge in Q1.
Why the chart?
Excess inventory, purchase obligations they couldn't fulfill because of the export rule.
Though they took a $4.5 billion hit from the restrictions, but still posted record revenue overall. What does that tell us?
Exactly. The key insight here from the analysis in your sources is that while geopolitics does impact parts of their business,
Clearly.
the underlying global demand for their core AI computing tech, especially outside China, is just so incredibly strong that it more than made up for those specific losses.
Who are the main parties involved in this whole Nvidia picture?
Well, Nvidia Corporation, obviously, the U.S. government setting those export policies,
Right.
and then the customers. Global data centers, cloud providers, AI developers worldwide driving that massive demand.
What are the broader implications here?
Nvidia's huge success, even with these hurdles, cements their AI leadership. It'll likely keep fueling investment across the AI landscape.
But the risk?
But that $4.5 billion hit really highlights the growing geopolitical risks in tech supply chains. Trade policy matters. Your sources suggest other tech firms are watching this closely, probably reassessing their own risks.
And the different perspectives your sources captured.
Investors likely see the numbers positively overall, but the reports note ongoing concern about those geopolitical tensions.
Competitors.
Competitors might see an opportunity in regions where Nvidia is restricted, and policymakers in the U.S. and elsewhere are probably weighing how these controls affect their own tech giants' global competitiveness.
Okay, sticking with tech companies. Your sources also cover Salesforce. They reported earnings that beat expectations, but their stock price dropped significantly. That seems backwards. What's going on?
It definitely looks odd on the surface, right? Salesforce announced Q1 FY26 results, and yeah, they surpassed analyst expectations. Adjusted earnings per share, 2.58 cents, revenue, $9.83 billion.
Good numbers.
And they even raised their full-year forecasts for revenue and profit, cited strong demand for cloud services, AI products.
So good results, better outlook. Why did the stock tank?
Here's the twist your sources highlight. Despite all that good news, Salesforce stock fell about 7% after the announcement.
Why?
The analysis in your material points heavily towards investor concerns about Salesforce's potential plan to acquire Informatica, a data management company.
But wouldn't acquiring a data company help their AI efforts? Isn't that the goal?
Precisely. That's likely Salesforce's rationale bolster data integration, which is key for better AI features. But the reports indicate skepticism from some analysts, some investors.
Skepticism about Informatica itself or something else?
It seems less about Informatica specifically and more about Salesforce's strategy of relying on big acquisitions for growth. Your sources mention concerns about mixed results from past big deals like MuleSoft, Tableau.
Ah, so it's a show-me attitude about whether these big buys actually pay off long-term.
That seems to be the sentiment reflected in the market reaction.
Yeah.
Can they successfully integrate and generate real value from these acquisitions?
Who are the main players here?
Salesforce, obviously. Informatica, the potential acquisition target, and the investors and analysts driving that stock movement based on their interpretation of the strategy.
What's the potential impact then?
Well, if the Informatica deal happens, it could genuinely strengthen Salesforce's data capabilities, help their AI push. That's the potential upside.
But the downside revealed by the stock drop
is that investor confidence in the acquisition strategy seems shaky. Your sources suggest Salesforce might need to work hard to demonstrate clear benefits and smooth integration with Informatica to win back that confidence.
and the different perspectives on this potential acquisition.
Based on the reports, optimists think it's a smart move, fills a data gap, boosts their AI position.
Makes sense.
Skeptics worry more about the execution risk, the track record of integrating big companies, the impact on long-term profitability.
And neutral observers.
Just waiting to see how it actually plays out if the deal happens.
Yeah.
Will it deliver the promised value? That's the question.
Okay, let's shift gears to science and technology. Your sources highlight a pretty sobering new global report about extreme heat and climate change. What did this report find?
Yeah, this one really brings the impact of climate change into the present day. It was released May 29th by groups including World Weather Attribution, Climate Central, the Red Cross.
Yeah.
The headline finding is stark. About 4 billion people, half the global population, experienced at least one extra month of extreme heat between May 2024 and May 2025.
An extra month.
An extra month that the report attributes directly to human-caused climate change. Heat they wouldn't have experienced otherwise.
Wow, half the world. An additional month of extreme heat. That's staggering. What kind of impacts does the report connect to this?
It details severe consequences. Directly links this added heat to increased illness, increased deaths globally,
Yeah.
also crop damage affecting food security, and huge stress on infrastructure, energy grids, healthcare systems.
Were there specific examples in the sources that really stood out?
Yes, the reports highlighted Puerto Rico. According to the analysis, climate change boosted the number of extreme heat days there within that year from a projected 48 days
Without climate change.
to 161 days.
161. That's over 100 extra days of extreme heat just from climate change.
That's the finding presented in your sources for that specific location. It's a dramatic illustration.
What's the bigger picture here? What action does the report call for?
The sources underscore that these findings are tangible proof of accelerating climate change impacting people's health and lives right now.
Not a future problem.
Not anymore. It emphasizes vulnerable groups are hit hardest. And crucially, it's a call to urgent action. Things like better early warning systems for heat waves, climate-resilient urban planning, more international cooperation.
Who are the main parties this report speaks to?
Well, the organizations who did the study. But really, it's directed at global populations, especially the vulnerable. And it's a direct message to policymakers, urban planners, worldwide people responsible for mitigation and adaptation.
What are the implications of these findings?
Huge challenges, immense pressure on public health systems during heat waves, threats to agriculture, food security, vulnerable infrastructure. This report really provides strong backing for governments, organizations to ramp up investment in climate adaptation and resilience.
And the different perspectives on the report.
Climate scientists see it as a critical warning, a clear call to action based on evidence.
Right.
Policymakers might use these findings to justify spending on climate resilience, public health preparedness. And for the general public, the hope is likely increased awareness, making the impacts feel more immediate, more personal.
Finally, your sources wrap up with severe weather and disasters, specifically focusing on the Canadian wildfires. What was the situation like around May 29th?
Canada was facing a really severe wildfire crisis then. The reports focused particularly on Manitoba and Saskatchewan.
Okay.
It had forced over 17,000 residents to evacuate one of Manitoba's largest evacuations ever, your sources noted. These fires were destroying homes, infrastructure, huge areas of forest. Across the country, over 130 active fires were still burning.
What's fueling fires on that scale?
The reports link it clearly to environmental factors: prolonged drought, high temperatures, strong winds.
A dangerous combination.
Exactly. And crucially, the analysis in your sources points out these conditions, the dryness, the heat, are being made worse by climate change, leading to more frequent, more intense, large fire events like this.
Were local resources enough to handle it?
The sources indicated no. The scale overwhelmed local firefighting capacity in many areas. They had requested federal help and potentially international aid as well. It highlights the growing challenge of managing these megafires.
Who are the main groups involved in dealing with this?
You have the Canadian federal and provincial governments coordinating the response. Local communities, First Nations communities, often disproportionately affected by evacuations and loss,
Right.
and potentially international aid organizations offering support.
What are the impacts of fires like these?
They're significant across the board. Environmentally huge forest loss, socially and economically devastating lost homes, infrastructure needing massive rebuilding, displacement causes trauma, challenges community cohesion, mental health,
And the smoke.
and the air quality impact is huge. A major health issue, not just locally, but as your sources mentioned, smoke traveled far, affecting air quality even down into parts of the U.S.
And the different perspectives on this crisis?
Government officials focus on the immediate response aid, evacuations, but also talk about long-term planning for mitigation.
Okay.
Environmental advocates use it to highlight climate change's role, pushing for stronger climate action.
And the people affected?
For residents, understandably, it's about safety, the trauma of loss, uncertainty about their community's future, just a really difficult situation.
So we've just walked through quite a range from your sources. Conflicts using new tech, humanitarian crises, legal rulings on executive power, government reform challenges, AI hardware giants navigating geopolitics, market reactions to tech strategy, a stark climate report, devastating wildfires. It's striking how much is happening all at once.
It really is. And looking at them together like this, you start to see the connections, don't you? Geopolitics hitting business, climate change fueling disasters, technology changing conflict and markets.
Yeah, the interconnectedness is hard to miss. So thinking about all this information you've absorbed from your sources, what's the takeaway?
Well, it raises a question, I think. As we see all these crises and developments overlapping, influencing each other, how do we move beyond just understanding each piece separately?
Right. How do we see the bigger picture?
Exactly. How do we start to grasp the larger trends underneath? The changing nature of conflict, the systemic impact of climate change, the challenges of governing in this super connected, fast-changing world. It's something to keep thinking about as you follow these unfolding stories.